Bill, how are you? Well, good morning, everybody. It's great to be out here in the great open spaces as we celebrate the unveiling of another historic marker here in our city. You know, the City of Winston-Salem and our Historic Properties Commission and Historic Resources Commission really committed to making sure that we celebrate the history all throughout our community. And one way we do that is by placing these historic markers at key locations and key events around the city. We're so delighted to be here on the grounds of Spees Elementary, Mr. Principal and Assistant Principal and staff here, and particularly we have a second grade class, right? We're the second graders. You're back in the back there. And we have a third grade class right in front. So we're really glad that you're here as well. I had the pleasure of being here, I guess, last week to speak at a third grade group there, so we're glad to be back. Today we're going to hear from a number of people as we share this experience. Want to first begin by introducing our Mayor Pro Tem, Councilmember Vivian H. Burke from the Northeast Ward.
Good morning. I'm right at home. I used to teach second, third grade. I also became a counselor, an elementary counselor. I taught the second grade a short time, and I taught the third grade much longer. And I've been to speech school so many times when it was the old school and now your new school. So to the principal and teachers, I understand clearly what you're all about. And to the children, I want you to know I'm so honored. It's a pleasure for me to stand here in front of you and to tell you how pleased our city is to have such fine young boys and girls, because tomorrow you will be our leaders. So again, it's my pleasure to be here to greet you and to say thank you for everything you do. And I do know that you'll make this polo field what you want it to be. May God continue to give us the strength we need to carry out our duties and responsibilities. Good morning.
Thank you, Councilmember Burke. Boys and girls, that we probably talked about last week, the fact that the city is represented by a number of council members from all parts of the city. We have one representative with us in addition to Councilmember Burke. We have Councilmember John Larson, who represents the South Ward and also lives right in Old Salem, a certainly historic part of it. So, Councilmember Larson.
Good morning, all. Good morning. What a pleasure to be here today to celebrate a piece of our history. I think it was William Shakespeare that said, what's a name? What's in a name? And we oftentimes have driven down this place called Polo Road. And I'm wondering how many people actually knew what that meant. And today we'll be able to celebrate it with this monument, this memorial marker that will explain a critical part of our history. How many of you students have played polo? Have actually been on horseback, have you? Been on horseback with a big stick and you've been hitting the ball and everything? How many of you have actually played soccer? Yeah. How many of you think you could play soccer on the back of a horse? All right, well, that's kind of gives you an idea maybe of what we're doing here. And if you look out at this field and you see your two goals out there, that would not be too unfamiliar to the people that were actually playing polo. I wish we had a polo team in Winston-Salem now, and we could enjoy that perhaps. But it's a glorious day for us to be celebrating. You're on a very historic site here, and it's something worth remembering and celebrating. And maybe when you go home, you can Google polo, and you can actually see what the game is all about. It's quite exciting, actually. So thank you for coming out today, and thank you for your interest in the history of our community.
Thank you, Councilmember Larson. For our program today, we're delighted that we have with us Kaki Berry, who is a member of the Forsyth County Historic Resources Commission. You know, that's a commission that we appoint, the City Council and I, that oversees a number of programs in our community. She'll be followed by Phil Archer, who is the Director of Program and Interpretation at Reynolda House Museum of American Art. And before we get started, I do want to recognize Allison Perkins, who is here, who is the director of the Reynolda House, and a number of her staff that are here as well. So thank you for being here as we hear about the exciting involvement of the this polo field here. So we begin by Khaki Berry.
Good morning. I'm a member of the Forsyth County Historic Resources Commission, and on behalf of that commission and the Historic Marker Committee, I'd like to thank you for being here this morning. The Historic Marker Program started over 10 years ago, and today we have over 50 markers throughout the city and the county. Historic markers help residents remember and learn about important places, people, and events in our community's history. These markers help mark a spot in history that should not be forgotten. Today we are here to celebrate the polo fields at Reynolda. This former 45-acre complex was established on the grounds of the Reynolda estate in 1923 by Catherine Smith Reynolds on behalf of the newly formed Winston-Salem polo team. During the Great Depression, polo fell out of fashion. And in 1959, Spiess Elementary was built on this portion of the site. Now, I was born and raised in Winston-Salem, and I never knew Winston-Salem had a polo team. And Councilman Larson, I've driven up and down this road my entire life and never thought about where its name came from. So I'm thankful for the Marker program for personally teaching me something about the history of my community that I did not know. I would like to introduce Phil Archer, the Betsy Main Babcock Director at the Reynolda House Museum of American Art, and he will speak more about the history of the polo fields. Mr. Archer.
Good morning, all. The polo fields at Reynolda requires a little bit of imagination because we know and love Spiess Elementary School, but I ask you to look out over this field and imagine the size of 34 football fields. Can you all imagine the size of a football field, more or less? Well, imagine 34 of those spread out, and that's how big these fields were that the horses ran up and down, and where they practiced, and where there was all kinds of stables for the horses to exercise. There were big grandstands where as many as 3,000 people came out to watch polo, which, as Councilmember Larson asked us to imagine, you're riding on a horse and hitting a little ball off the side of the horse. And it took amazing cooperation between rider and horse. And this is, in a way, a story of cooperation. It's a story of love, and it's a story of war. Catherine Smith Reynolds developed the Reynolda estate and community to be over 1,000 acres in size. And one of her final accomplishments in creating her estate was building R.J. Reynolds Memorial High School for the city of Winston-Salem and creating these polo fields. And it was a story of war because polo was played by veterans of World War I. It was thought that the best way to train a soldier to ride a horse in combat was to have him learn how to play polo, because of the agility and the kind of intuitive relationship that can be created between the rider and the horse. So when veterans came back from World War I, they had learned how to play polo and they wanted to keep playing. This is a story of love because Catherine Smith Reynolds married a second time in 1921. R.J. Reynolds, that's a name very familiar to you in this city. R.J. Reynolds died in 1918, and his wife, 3 years later, married the principal of the school in Reynolda Village. So there was a little school that had 150 students right in Reynolda Village. As you drive by, you can imagine that school and all those children. Well, the principal of that school and Catherine really kind of, a bond grew between them because they both were interested in education and making education better in Winston-Salem. So they developed R.J. Reynolds High School together, and they developed that school in Reynolda Village. Well, he loved polo. He had been a soldier in World War I. So one of her gifts to her husband was this huge polo complex and the creation of a polo team for Winston-Salem. So that's love and war. It's a story of competition as well, because Winston-Salem in this period, the early 20s through the 30s, played polo against other cities like Charlotte, Atlanta, Richmond. They played the state champs, Pinehurst, and they won a couple times. They even played against Harvard University. So there was a time where polo in Winston-Salem was the sport to go watch. As Carrie Berry told us, it was a luxury sport. It's not very affordable to keep a whole stable of horses to play your game every Sunday afternoon. So with the Great Depression and World War I, it fell out of play. Sports fans in Winston-Salem were consoled by the growth of baseball and our local team, the Twins. But for a brief time, Winston-Salem was really known as a home for polo. It was also a testament to cooperation in the city. Catherine Reynolds was arguably the most influential citizen after her husband's death. And how did she show that influence? She showed it by developing schools and the arts in this city. And the team that played here were not just any old players. It included the mayor of Winston-Salem, so I don't know if we'd want to return to wearing those jodhpurs. But the mayor of Winston-Salem, the presidents of the Haynes Hosiery Company and Chatham Manufacturing, members of the Reynolds family, future state senators, and a future U.S. congressman, president of Wachovia Bank. So it was really the city leadership that got together to practice and to play. So Catherine Reynolds exerted a sort of soft power, you might say, but that power and its legacy in the arts and education are with us today. So I would call that a very durable sort of power, and it was about cooperation through learning together and playing together, because that's how we build teams and that's how we build friendships. So I hope that some of that history will now be more alive for the citizens of Winston-Salem, and especially for Spies Elementary. It couldn't be any more fitting that this land is now a home for education. I think that's exactly what Catherine Reynolds would have wanted for these fields. So thank you so much for being here, and I hope that the marker will bring some of this history to life every day for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Archer. That was a fascinating story of this. I had no idea it was 30 football field size here. It's huge. Catherine Reynolds had a tremendous impact on our city, and Councilmember Burke was just reminding me of another investment she made, and that's the KBR Hospital in East Winston, as well as Winston Lake Park. Our city manager is here, Lee Garrity, and his staff there. So, Lee, thank you for being with us. Now we are going to officially unveil this. It's been unofficially unveiled already, but we'll do an official. Maybe ask the members of the program to come up. Mr. President, we think we could have the students come up with us as we do that, or is that a little too close to the road? Why don't the students come on up and stand around as we unveil this?